We all know what that music means. It's Scrooge! And look at all the proper Disney animation. And they got the actual voices from the show. Oh, the nostalgia of bouncing on the cane again. The moon. The moon! DuckTales is back, baby. It's back. I hate it. What? Oh no. DuckTales Remastered is a strange game to want to talk about in detail, as there's only really two groups when it comes to the reception of this kind of niche product. Either you couldn't care less and probably forgot this came out by now, or you're huddled up deep in the target audience and it gets your nostalgic juices pumping. I understand that WayForward bring a lot of passion to all their projects and regularly produce nicely polished games that at least look and sound great. And with that in mind, I get that DuckTales Remastered may be little more than a brief comfort food gaming session to a lot of people. So with that in mind, if you don't want to hear anything bad about this game, then there's the door. Go watch the Uncharted video, it needs all the help it can get. But for those who are staying, I'm going to tear this game apart and wrap it all up with a broader, more important argument about video games preservation and history, while trying not to be too much of a jerk about it. Let's go! DuckTales, released in the West as DuckTales Awoo, is a side-scroller by Capcom first released in 1989, and it's pretty good. Non-linear levels give it an extra tint of exploration over a lot of action games of the time, bouncing along on Scrooge's cane is a satisfying core mechanic, and it's got some tunes. People routinely freak out about the Moon song, but honestly this entire soundtrack is one of the 8-bit standouts. Personally, I've always been a fan of the Amazon myself. So yeah, this is a pretty decent game. I wouldn't go so far to call it a classic, but it's a solid addition to the NES library. And I'm not saying that to rag on it, only to point out that I don't have any strong personal attachment to this game, so any negative comments I make about the remake don't come from a place of wounded betrayal. So, picture the scene. It's California and you work for WayForward Technologies. Disney and or Capcom approach you with this project to remake the old DuckTales game. What's the first thing you ask yourself? Why can't we remake Quackshot instead? Okay, I jest, but really, you sit back and ask yourself, come on Disney, can't we just do Quackshot? You sit back and ask yourself, how do I approach a remake of an NES game based on a Disney property for modern consoles? Wait, I got it. We can recreate the original level design with proper Disney animation and combine it with cutscenes featuring the actual DuckTales voice cast. Then we've got nostalgia for the game and the TV show mixed together for the perfect companion piece for fans. And BT dub, it's Quackshot. And that all sounds great on paper. People were excited when this project was announced, and even more excited when screenshots started coming out and it all looked lovely. But since I gave the game away in the opening 30 seconds, let's not waste any more time. It doesn't work, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I'm sorry, I know it was a lot of work, but it still doesn't work. I could go through this whole game screen by screen, but pretty much every issue with this remake can be revealed with analysis of the worst level of the game, and honestly quite possibly one of the worst examples of level design ever, the home of hot tunes itself, the Amazon. Here's how it works. Scrooge finds a map revealing the location of 5 treasures. One of each can be found inside the 5 returning NES stages. Each stage starts off with a cutscene back at the mansion, explaining where they're going to and what they're doing, then loads into another cutscene at the location, setting up whatever the storyline is for this level. Here, Scrooge is looking for a temple while Launchpad is circling above in his plane, on the outlook for trouble. Then you finally get to start playing, and it's all instantly familiar and pretty faithful to the original at first. Then you find this coin 15 seconds in, and play stops again, so Scrooge can have a little monologue about it inside another cutscene. Okay, that's sort of annoying. Once you climb this vine to advance to the next part of the stage, like you did in the original, you find this statue and Scrooge stops again to have another monologue about it. You notice the 8 holes, and it slowly dawns on you. Oh no, I gotta go get all those coins. Okay, so it's pretty annoying that this remake of a simple 8-bit NES platformer from 1989 is getting stopped 10 times in the first couple of screens by cutscenes that weren't a part of the original form, but that doesn't even begin to cover all the problems caused by this change. Here's a map I dug out from the WayForward archives of the basic level layout, and here's the location of all the coins. Problem number 1. You'll notice you have to do a loop of the entirety of this section to get all 8 coins, whereas in the original you're free to go whatever way you choose and explore what you like. Adding that option to play the game differently every time, that was very important back in the limited cartridge size days of the NES. Here you pretty much have to play the game exactly the same way every single time, and although the extra cutscenes pad out this remake's running time, it's still far too short to be piddling on its replayability like this. Problem number 2. Some of these coins are put in places that were considered hidden or bonus areas in the original game, so what was before a little fun reward for exploration is now a mandatory chore you have to do every time you play the game. Combine these two issues, and the only conclusions are either the level designer didn't understand the intent of the original, or they did, but they have nothing but contempt for it. Actually, the way the coins are laid out, no matter what route you take while you're doing a lap of the stage, you're forced to backtrack and go through either the underground or overground at least twice. So it turns out they didn't really grasp basic geometry either. Way forward, more like loop backward. At this point, you might be questioning the general vision of attempting to repackage the levels as episodes of the television show in the first place. No matter how good of a writer you are, it's going to be a challenge to make 8 identical scenes of an old duck wandering around a jungle holding coins over his head funny or interesting.
Launchpad, I found an ancient coin depicting a nightingale.
Neato! You haven't stumbled across a pizza joint down there, have you, Mr. McD?
It's funny because it's pizza. There's something off with the cutscenes in general, to be honest. It is nice the original cast came back to do the voices, and they all do a good job, but somehow characters cycling through idle animations on a 2D plane with no lip sync doesn't quite capture the magic of the television show. Admittedly, I haven't seen the show in a while, but I don't remember an episode where Huey, Dewey and Louie talked to Scrooge about a spooky mansion while he just stood there, glancing off into the distance with a dead-eyed, soulless stare as he wished for death to come. Remember, kids, capitalism is one hell of a drug. Once you finally find all the coins and Launchpad flies you across the pit to the next part of the stage, you may also notice some quirks with the game's art design. Now, you might be thinking, come on, how can you possibly have anything negative to say about how this game looks? That's proper Disney animation, you're just trolling. And okay, it looks appealing, but I don't know how well it works for this project. Look at this part where you're hopping back and forth off a rope to catch teleporting jewels on floating single blocks on an otherwise empty screen. Perfectly acceptable in the flat, abstract fueled days of the NES, but the shiny new art style here only highlights how ridiculous it is. The minecarts screw me up in this game for similar reasons. The modern presentation plants a seed in my brain that there will be some sort of physics and the cart will fire me forwards, but it doesn't, and you have to force yourself out of the cart like any other jump to make these gaps. It feels so weighed down and unnatural. But there's a more subtle problem with this new art direction that's really hard to explain, especially if you haven't played it. Full disclosure, I have a degree in journalism and talk about video games on the internet, so I don't know anything about art, but there's definitely something jarring about controlling flat, two-dimensional characters on three-dimensional platforms that slightly rotate as you walk across them in front of a 3D background. It's like there's a vanishing point in the middle of the screen, but it doesn't affect anything directly in the foreground, so it's like you're walking across a straight line, but it's actually being slightly stretched along the outside of a sphere, so you can lose your sense of place. I don't know, that's the best I can do. I've heard others complain about feeling detached from these 2.5D platformers before, but it's hard to put it into words. If you've got a more sensible method of explaining this, then let me know. Regardless of whether it was the art putting me off, or some potential lag or control problems I experienced with the PlayStation 3 version, which are too subtle for me to even bother trying to explain outside of it feels wrong sometimes. When I first played DuckTales Remastered, I couldn't quite get the feel of it right away, and I lost my final life fighting the boss of the Amazon level. Then the game booted me back to the stage select screen, and I realised I had to do it all over again. Do the loop, find the 8 coins, pause and mash skip on all 16 of the cutscenes, causing me to curl into a ball and have a little cry. Yeah, sure, they patched the game months later so you could play with minimal cutscenes, but that's not much of a defense, to be honest. Sure, it makes the game marginally more tolerable, but it doesn't help anyone who bought it during its release window, and it doesn't fix any of the inherent flaws. Generally speaking, you can skip the cutscenes isn't a great counter-argument for most games because it fails to address any issues within the form or the cutscenes themselves. Without the cutscenes, DuckTales Remastered is just a prettier and sloppier take on the original game with little identity. Remember, this was WayForward's entire vision for this remake. This is what they built the entire game on, and what all the creative decisions were based around. Removing the cutscenes isn't so much a fix as it is an admission that their vision was wrong. Whatever you think of the choice to include so many cutscenes, their existence in the game only makes the fact I was even able to run out of lives all the more irritating. Now you might be saying, wait a minute. Earlier on, you were banging on about them not respecting the original design. Now you're ragging on them for keeping a part of it. What gives? Fair point, but I'd say in general, life systems are usually worth leaving in the past. Obviously, there's always exceptions to any rule where they can be utilised in a clever way, but generally speaking, as far as lives go, they're at best a hangover from the arcade credit days, and at worst they're a way of artificially extending gameplay time, because games were a lot shorter in them days. But this is based on an NES game, I hear you respond inside my head. If there's no life system, there's barely any penalty for dying, and then there's no challenge. You got me again, let me think. You've got a game where you play as Scrooge McDuck, with an emphasis on exploring to find hidden treasures for money that you can spend on locked content in the museum. What could you do to punish the player if they died? Nope, I got nothing, you win this round. But the actual problem with this life system is the inclusion of all these cutscenes have changed the form and structure of the game. The levels in the NES game take roughly a couple of minutes each. In DuckTales Remastered, all of them are triple their original length, due to the inclusion of longer boss battles, padded levels, and cutscenes. You can't view all this new content as additions or extras to the core game design. It is a fundamental change to the core game design, and one that forces you to rethink everything from the ground up. If you're repackaging all these levels as a mini episode of the DuckTales television show, then having a live system which could potentially cause that episode to crash halfway through and rewind itself back to the opening credits doesn't make any sense. As much as I could go level by level and nitpick every screen of this game, it's the general direction of the project that is the problem. It's obvious the team approached this with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of ideas of how to expand upon the original. We can make it look like a proper Disney cartoon, we can redo all the music, we can make every level like the TV show, we'll add in our own brand new levels and bosses. And there's some elements of praise to be given to a lot of aspects individually, but they just don't come together. The art direction undermines the platforming, the cutscenes undermine the level design, and the 8-bit core of the game undermines the cutscenes. You can't take a beautiful piece of art, cut it into pieces, improve each of them separately, and then paste it back together and say, there you go, it's objectively better than the original. That pretty much covers why I don't enjoy playing DuckTales Remastered, but that doesn't fully explain why I dislike it so strongly, and outright reject it at a conceptual level. To explain what I mean, we need to go to the moon.
You mean the moon?
Yes, the moon! Since the music for the moon stage from the original game is so famous, WayForward decided to build DuckTales Remastered around it thematically. Like every other level, we get our intro cutscene explaining why we're here and what we're doing, but for the moon, we get this extra little tidbit.
Now, Gyro, why in blazes are we chewing this awful blue muck?
Why, that's Oxy Chew, Mr. McDuck. It's my latest invention, oxygen-flavored taffy. 5 good chews and you can breathe on the lunar surface without a spacesuit.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. They actually explain how Scrooge McDuck can breathe on the moon. Now, you might think that's a perfectly reasonable creative decision for a remake, and in some ways it is, even if it only adds more questions than answers because they didn't bother to explain how the Beagle Boys also got this taffy, but whatever. However, it speaks volumes about the mentality of this whole production. You see, with games from the 80s, graphics was severely limited, and there was always a strong sense of minimalism and abstraction that generally merely suggested ideas towards what they were supposed to represent. That's an important piece of context for understanding how these games were enjoyed in their time. You play the game and maybe you think, how can he breathe on the moon? Is he wearing some special spacesuit? Is it the aliens providing a breathable atmosphere? Or maybe you just don't even care at all. This is what I like to call dad design. Because did you ever watch cartoons as a kid and have your dad come in and start nitpicking it like, how does that frog fit inside that little ball? Come on. Well, that's what WayForward pulled with this game. Don't worry kids, we fixed it for you. Now there are no logical holes in this scenario where Scrooge McDuck pogo sticks his way around the moon. Just accept what we came up with and there's no imagination required. I don't even know what direction you're going in anymore. I mean, why stop here? Why don't you come up with a way to explain how Webby kisses this shark in the intro when she's got a fishbowl on her head? Ever since I noticed that, I haven't been able to enjoy the song since. It's a silly change, but the real reason it bothers me is the original NES game is not a part of this package, nor is it currently available to purchase from any digital download service. Now, some WayForward stuff did express interest on including it, but hit brick walls, so this is probably more Capcom's fault than anything. Even though no emulator has ever been found to be illegal in a court of law, I guess a lot of Japanese companies are scared of upsetting Nintendo. By the way, here's a very good GDC talk on the benefits of emulation, historically, artistically and commercially, that I heartily recommend, and also covers the issue of remaking a game without having the original available. So WayForward weren't able to solve the mystery of how to include the original game, but they did a pretty good job of rewriting history. As much as I don't like DUCKTALES Remastered, I would be willing to accept it if it wasn't lacking this context. Hey, when it's presented alongside the original, a bad remake can actually highlight its merits, but when you present a remake like this by itself, with its many subtle and not so subtle changes to the core design, while scooping out anything from the original the new designers considered a mistake, then you're trying to replace history. I'm sure WayForward had the best of intentions going into this project, and had all the love in the world for the original game, but I'm not so sure that they had the proper respect for it. They viewed the design decisions made in 1989 as inherently wrong due to the limitations of the time, and saw DuckTales NES as something that needed to be replaced with a game that was closer to the source material that inspired it. They thought that because their game is more faithful to the TV show, they were making it more official, while failing to understand that DuckTales, the NES game, by itself, is a cultural artifact that exists separately from the television show and also deserves to be preserved in history. This shouldn't be ignored, and DuckTales is far from the only victim of this, with the video game industry's notoriously short memory and aversion to backwards compatibility. Our memories do not deserve to be changed or distorted, or worse, replaced with new, shinier ones, and we're doing a disservice to anyone who wants to understand video games as an art form or an industry by keeping the past increasingly out of reach while pretending remaking tiny fragments of it with a modern spin is good enough. I hate DuckTales Remastered on its own merits, but I could at least forgive it if not for this one fault. There's nothing wrong with trying a fresh spin on old concepts as long as you're not replacing the original. On the bright side, it did give us a killer remix of the soundtrack, it had some nice extra touches here and there, and gave us an extra 76 cutscenes to a 20-minute long NES game. Wait, no, that's not good. Scratch that last one. Actually, the final level is 100% WayForward original level, which for some reason tries to blend narrative into the platforming while only using 5 cutscenes. Even if there's some terrible level design like this pit, where you have to bounce across these enemies perfectly on your first try, because they don't respawn so you can get stuck. And here where they made the background the same colour as the health bar, so you can't, Okay, I give up. I dislike this game too much to make this video even remotely balanced. I'm sorry. As far as video game preservation goes, we need to remember that design is not the only part of our culture worth covering. The fact that so many people connected with the original DuckTales in its day and still love it now is something worth celebrating and analysing. Thanks to Star Wars, people seem to understand this about movies now, but there's still a mentality within video games that old games' flaws make them less valuable, and depending on their commercial value, should be remade with the kinks removed, or forgotten entirely. While shunning our past and remaking games in a space where retro aesthetics are becoming increasingly common for new games, we're at risk of corrupting our understanding of what retro games actually were. I don't need to break this clip out again, do I?
It's time to put an end to my past for good!
How foolish! It's our past that makes us who we are today!
In closing, projects like the official Mega Drive/Genesis emulator that Sega released on Steam give me hope. It provides an easy legal way to purchase an ever-increasing library of old games, while supporting a mod community which lets people make changes and have all kinds of fun with the games without ever replacing or degrading the importance of the originals. And even better, do you know what you can play on a Mega Drive emulator? Quackshot!